Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to the very first external webinar organized by the Inogen Alliance Water Working Group. I hope you can all hear me and see me well. Okay, great. So my name is Beatrice Bizzarro. I am a geologist and sustainability consultant at HPC Italy. And today I will be moderating the session, which will be centered around building climate resilience from a flood risk modeling and an ESG perspective. So before giving a quick recap of the agenda and presenting our speakers, of course, I would like to spend just a couple of words really explaining who is Inogen Alliance. So as the name implies, Inogen is an alliance. It's a network of associate consultancy companies operating from all three macro regions of the world, as you can see, in the fields of sustainability, ESG, environment, and health and safety. So Inogen Alliance was born more than 20 years ago, and at the time from a relatively small group of companies, realized that it was quite complicated to open up offices in every country in the world. So the best way forward was really to group up and work collaboratively together with other companies with similar values, ambitions, and services. So that really is how Inogen started. And since then, we have 76 associates on board, operating from 200 offices with more than 6,000 consultants that have delivered projects in 150 countries and more. So our motto in Inogen Alliance is global thinking, local delivery, because it really is through this global and consolidated network of experts that we can provide through a single point of contact, that local and granular delivery, while maintaining a standardized and consistent approach anywhere in the world. So in Inogen Alliance, we have 8 working groups, one of which, of course, is the Water Working Group, which I have had the immense pleasure of leading and coordinating over the last year. As you can see, the team is extremely multifunctional, global coverage, and we offer a wide range of water-related services. I will be sharing a link in our dedicated webpage in the chat if you want to have a closer look at it. We currently have a steering committee of approximately 43 water experts from a total of 31 associates located in 29 countries. So today you will be hearing from 3 of these associates: HPC Germany, Delta Simons from the UK, and Tonkin and Taylor from New Zealand. So I can assure you that the hardest part of this webinar was actually finding a feasible time zone in which none of us were sleeping, but we managed, we're here, and we are ready to get the session started. So here are our session speakers. We will have Alex Perryman, who leads the water service team at Delta Simons. We will then have Peter Struck, who is head of the remediation and geotechnical department at HPC Germany, followed by Orange, who is project manager at the civil engineering and surveying department at HPC Germany. And last but not least, we'll have John Ricks, who is Tonkin and Taylor's sector lead for climate and hazard resilience. So before leaving, let's say the word to our first speaker of the session, I just wanted to, let's say, give a general overview of the agenda and also of the main housekeeping rules. So as anticipated, this is an external webinar, which will have the duration of approximately 1 hour and a half, with the last 15 minutes dedicated to questions from the audience. So we're pleased to see many of you from all parts of the world. So we're looking forward to some interesting questions rolling in at the end. So our 4 speakers, like I said, come from 3 different associates. Alex from Delta Simon will be illustrating risk assessment modalities for flood and climate resilience from an ESG perspective. Peter and O will be illustrating a case study on how 3D modeling can be used as a predictive tool, risk assessment tool, to anticipate flood events. John from Tonkin & Taylor will be presenting on how to build flood and climate resilience through ESG dedicated strategies. Very simple housekeeping rules. So in order not to interfere with the presentations and quality of the audio, of course, please keep mics and cameras switched on during the entire session of the webinar. Due to time restrictions, we will be having questions at the end, but I can see the chat box, so make sure to post them and we will have them gathered at the end of our speakers' interventions. So recordings will be made available on demand on our Inogen Alliance resource section. You will all receive an email after the webinar, but I will also link the, let's say, the resource page in the chat box. So that is all from my side. And Alex, the stage, or should I say the screen, is yours.
Thanks, Beatrice. Could you share this? Perfect. Thanks. Next slide, please. So thanks for introducing that. Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Alex Perryman, and I lead the water services team at Delta Simons, based out of the Leeds office in England. My latest role is to research into the ESG arena from a flood risk, physical climate risk and climate change perspective, and to develop appropriate products to sell our clients. So this flood risk and ESG presentation from me will last about 20 minutes and focuses on what our real estate investor clients are asking for in the marketplace with regards to flood risk from climate change, due diligence, and ESG perspective. And why are they asking the questions, as in what's the main drivers? What is the approach? How do we apply this to the UK? What are the common constraints, gaps, and overlaps with this data? And finally, what at Delta Simons are we doing about it in terms of research and development and the products that we are offering our existing and our any new target clients? Next slide, please. So to summarize, ESG stands for environmental social governance. The ESG factors are increasingly influencing investment decisions across the world. What are the potential impacts if you don't consider ESG? Well, by not considering it, we feel that investors are running the risk of potential devaluation of the asset, as well as damaging their ability to sell the asset. There's a potential for operational disruption and insurance challenges, particularly, for example, physical risks such as sea level rise is not considered. So I've only provided a brief slide or two on the ESG criteria and to show that flood and climate change largely fits into the E of ESG and is heavily interlinked. The S&G is not heavily covered in this presentation, but in the slide for completeness. It doesn't mean that flood risk and climate change does not have a social governance impact, because they do. The impact on flooding on society is huge in terms of economic damages, loss of life, the aftermath, cleanup, and what is being done to mitigate the risk through, say, England's Environment Agency and local authorities, etc. So who's asking the questions on ESG and flood risk? Why? Well, real estate investors want to safeguard their business from future risks such as climate change. And personally, ESG has gained a greater importance among investors, policymakers, and key stakeholders. And as a result, investors are frequently asking these questions: can you assess ESG from a climate perspective? And that's so they can be transparent for market participants to help aid their decision making, position their portfolios accordingly, and help with their overall ESG strategy. Next slide, please. So the main or first question that I mentioned in the agenda is, what's the main drivers? The main driver is the TCFD, or Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures. The TCFD is a global framework. It's been designed to improve the disclosure of these climate related information, or in a transparent way. It has become a mandatory requirement for certain size businesses. I believe it's about over 500 this year, and that's why the real estate investors are asking questions of climate change and flood risk now, to get a better understanding of what is required and what steps need to be taken. Now, there are other frameworks you may be aware of, like the SFDR, However, that has a heavier weighting on sustainability. So for us, the TCFD is the main go-to framework, especially from a climate change perspective, and that will help investors develop an overarching ESG strategy. So it will become a mandatory requirement for all businesses. It's expected to be around 2025, but the requirements are expected to be more firmly set this year. Now, there's also EU taxonomy. It helps investors assess and disclose the environmental sustainability of their activities and products. It promotes transparency and facilitating the transition to a greener economy. Now, that's in line, for some of you might know, with the EU sustainability goals. Delta Simons has therefore developed a range of products and to assess physical climate risks that have the potential to impact the company and its facilities. It includes flood risk, but it does actually further extend into other indicators such as heat waves, heat stress, water stress, wildfires, wind, etc. So our reports can be used by clients to inform EU taxonomy as well as TCF disclosures as part of a joined up approach. Next slide, please. So there are other drivers. There are legislative drivers, such as the TCFD, which will clearly affect both financial and operational drivers, as per this slide. For example, with an increase in climate change as a result, an increase in climate risk as a result of climate change, e.g. sea level rise, and without measures implemented over time, there is a real risk of devaluation of an asset. Furthermore, operational disruption, saleability and insurance challenges. Therefore, to reduce these risks, the solutions are a potential of measures to reduce the risk from climate change, and then there will be a cost to install these measures. These implications and the measures are to ensure that there is a return on investment for any upgrades or improvements to future-proof an asset. This will then help the client decision making in terms of whether to say keep, buy or sell an asset. There are other drivers, which include shareholder pressure to complete an ESG strategy. Otherwise, they may not be able to attract flagship tenants and potentially impact reputation. Next slide, please. So the TCFD requirements means the use of global IPCC data, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has for the UK has been reduced down to the UK level, which is called the UK CP18 climate data or the UK climate projections 18 data. Now, from a flood risk and physical risk perspective, increasing temperatures assessed as part of ESG can, and then there's a list on the slide. For example, increasing the severity of extreme weather events may financially impact operations. For example, increased temperatures can result in melting ice and seawater expansion, leading to global sea level rise. That leads to an increased risk of flooding, operational disruption to assets that are located in coastal or lower elevations. Rising sea levels can lead to an increase in risk of coastal erosion and the loss and reduction of beaches. Similarly, rainfall changes could result in increased flows into the sea, but also into nearby watercourses via overland flow, into site drainage, topo depressions. It can also, if prolonged, rainfall can result in an increase in the water table, leading to groundwater emergence and reducing infiltration, resulting in increased surface water runoff. It may also increase and contribute to coastal erosion. Therefore, there's combined interactions from one or more of these sources. In water scarce areas, we see reduction in water availability to use within assets, such as washroom facilities and irrigation. Any future planning, such as new or expansion to existing assets in a flood risk area, may be objected to by a government unless a flood risk assessment or drainage strategy is completed. My view is that while planning is not firmly embedded, or ESG is not firmly embedded in planning yet, my view is that it will soon be. So the table in the bottom right is an extract from the UK CP18 sea level rise table. It's specifically for London. It does extend to Wales, Scotland, other areas in the UK, and it's shown for each RCP and time period, which I will define on the next slide. So this was the starting point for the development of our tools. Next slide, please. So the TCFD breaks down risks into physical and transitional risks. Simply put, physical risks, which is the main reason for this presentation, is climate event driven risks such as flooding, water stress, wind, ground conditions, amongst others as shown on this slide. Transition risks, if interested, arise from changes in policy and new technologies such as the growth of renewable energy. The physical risks we assess are shown on the screen are analysed using representative concentration pathways, or RCPs. Simply put, they're greenhouse gas emission trajectories defined by the IPCC. The main RCPs assessed are the RCP 2.6, which is the low emission scenario, or 1.6 degree temperature increase by 2100. The medium emissions scenario, the 6.0, there is also a 4.5, and the RCP 8.5. The 8.5 is a high emissions scenario, or roughly, I think it's a 4.3 degree rise by 2100, and that is considered within the UK CP18 data. So the key takeaway point is for real estate investors need to assess two of these RCPs. The first mandatory one is the RCP 2.6, the best case scenario. The second case we tend to advise is the RCP 8.5, worst case 2100 extreme time frame, because if your assets are not at risk in this scenario, you're protected from climate change. If there is a level of risk, then we do that deeper dive. Next slide, please. So our flood risk and GIS team can produce a series of graphics in-house, which includes flood risk. However, the map is shown. Is the map on the screen? Yeah. However, the map shown is one of our physical climate risk maps and an example of what we can produce for each physical risk indicator. So this example is the cooling degree days indicator. Flood risk will follow on the next slide. So in this indicator for physical climate risks, it's cooling degree days, the effect of outside air temperature on building energy consumption annually, and therefore how much cooling will be required in the building. We split the graphic from a national down to a more regional and local site-specific area. So this helps us provide visualization to our scoring system, where we analyze the climate statistics from a best to worst case scenario and through time periods. And in this case, you can see that it's really only in the medium and the worst case scenario. So it's the last box and then the third from last box, where you can see the most risk. So that's also in the later 2070 to 2100 time periods that there's a shift or increase in outside air temperature that would suggest greater energy consumption to cool the building, and therefore additional measures need to be put in place. So we simply screen the data, assess the impacts, assign the risk ratings, report on it, and provide potential recommendations and next steps. Next slide, please. So to go into a flood risk example, this is a tidal flood risk example, which can be part of a flood risk and climate report or within the physical climate reporting. The site will remain anonymous, but this shows a comparison between the Environment Agency model data on the left and the UK CP18 model data for sea level rise on the right. So in this example, the EA data shows the site impacted from the tidal 1 in 200 year flood event with depths less than 1.2 meters for the greater 2115 epoch or time frame. Similarly, the UK CP18 tidal data shows a similar story, with the onset of flooding occurring in 2090, but with a sea level rise of only 0.97 meters. So about 0.2 meters different. By 2100, the worst case RCP climate scenario, the depths actually only reach 0.45 meters depth. The UK CP18 modelling allows for a more granular assessment, looking if required at every time horizon, every RCP scenario. But in summary, the UK CP18 data shows a lower depth rating in a shorter time frame. We're not saying one is better than the other, we're just suggesting a combined holistic or cumulative approach of the risks builds up a picture and allows you to provide a better or more robust flood and climate risk rating. Next slide, please. Now, in this example, it shows that not everything aligns. So in this example, the EA data shows for the 1 in 200 year flood event, the site is at risk of depths up to about 0.3 by 2115, which is the EA timeframe there. The UK CP18 data model shows the site is not at risk even in the RCP 8.5 2100 climate scenario. It actually suggests that it takes a sea level rise of 1.6 meters, which is beyond the RCP 8.5, in order to impact the site. So again, we use both data sets to form a risk rating over the short, medium and long term, as per the next slide, where mitigation should be considered if nothing changes. So I'll come on to the limitations and gaps later on in this presentation. Next slide, please. So with this information, we split each climate risk into 5 equal categories between 1 and 5, low to high risk, reported on for each climate risk indicator, including flood risk, with the climate indicator along the top row and the time period along the left-hand side, or down the left-hand side, to provide consistency in our approach and scoring. So it's a simple example of flood and climate risk ratings, which go into our report template. So broadly speaking, we have multiple products assessing multiple sites and including single sites if needed, from initial assessments through to more detailed assessments. So we provide a range of tailored and adaptable products to meet the client's needs. And if you need questions or have any questions, we offer an advisory service where we can talk about ESG, TCFD, physical risks, how it's being embedded into future planning to help guide clients through that ESG labyrinth. Next slide, please. As I've suggested, there are data limitations and assumptions. This is not exhaustive, but covers the main points. One of the limitations is it takes 20 working days for the Environment Agency in the UK to provide appropriate flood risk data. Ideally, we compare EA data to UK CP18 data for sites at tidal risk to gain the best possible picture of risk to the site and work out what is most representative. Where EA data is not available, we use third-party anecdotal evidence or Copernicus climate data. However, this could be based on our judgment and interpretation of the data. Also, without detailed EA data, there's no easy way to directly correlate between UK CP18 and EA data. Therefore, the sites at fluvial and surface water risk, we do have high-level data, which does lessen the accuracy. However, we can still offer a service. The EA at the moment does not assess all RCPs and timeframes. The EA, or Environment Agency, has responded to say flood zones broadly correlate with the RCP 8.5 extreme worst case scenario. However, the internal mechanisms are not fully known, such as how temperature has been included within their modelling, so it can restrict a direct comparison with the UK CP18 data. Now, the main limitation, I'd say, is the online data from the EA varies in coverage, quality and accuracy, and the detailed data sets as well. So our products can vary from coarse general national modelling data sets to detailed hydraulic modelling. And the EA data, for example, doesn't always separate fluvial and tidal. It can, but it doesn't always. And therefore, when you comparing with just the tidal risk, there can be discrepancies. So you have to take that into account. The portals we use are often black box, so there offers limited manipulation. So that's where we as consultants come in to offer that professional judgment on the risks and evidence available. Amongst the challenges, there are positives. It allows us to offer various service offerings depending on time frame and level of detail. We provide comparisons between the data sets in terms of, say, extents and depths assessed. We can assess fluvial and surface water more at a high level. We can offer tidal at a more detailed level. We can visualize and compare the results, and we can work with the data and the units of measurements the various data sets provide and showcase. Next slide, please. So we can offer a staged approach where we either complete a rapid RAG, flood risk screening assessment, for our clients to assess an asset or portfolio of assets. Stage 2 is to complete a physical climate risk assessment for those priority sites. Or following the completion of the physical climate risk assessment, we can conduct a deeper dive into certain physical risks, such as flood risks. For example, tidal tends to be always high up on the priority risk ratings because it gives the highest economic damage, the most risk of operational disruption. And lastly, we offer an advisory service to discuss matters such as how flood risk, EU taxonomy, ESG, TCFD, physical risks, future planning interlink. So the last point I want to say is the goalposts are often moving as guidance is evolving. Therefore, our services are adapting as we keep pace with ESG. Last slide, please. So in summary, ESG is largely applicable to the transactional market as investors seek to appropriately assess and price the risks and position their portfolios accordingly. The main driver is the TCFD, from which you use the global IPCC data and then we in the UK reduce it down to the UK CP18 data to assess flood risk in different ways to the standard or alongside the standard EA approach. Flood risk and climate change is within the E of ESG and is part of or included within the physical risks section. The main limitation is the data generally differs in terms of coverage, quality, accuracy and compatibility with a mix of differing RCPs and time periods, and therefore we offer different services as a result, ranging from high-level RAG assessments through to more detailed standalone assessments. Last slide, thank you. I think that's it from me, Beatrice.
Thank you so much, Alex. So as anticipated at the beginning, we'll hold all the questions for the end. So if you have any, please leave them in the chat box. And now I will leave the word to Peter and HPC Germany.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Does it work?
Thank you, Peter. We see you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes, quick introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Peter Struck, and yeah, I'm coming from a landscape architect, environmental civil engineering background, and I'm gonna take up the lead from Alex and yeah, bring it more into a yeah, more project down basis. I'm gonna turn off my video. I think that's easier then. So now Alex talked about the environmental agency information that's available and more often readily available. We have the same for this project, which is located in Bavaria, which is actually where I'm located at HPC as well. At the Danube River. The Danube River is a large stream in Bavaria, and we have an industrial site here, and there's the modeled flood extent, but also the 100-year flood extent, as you can see here. So, and we're looking pretty much at this area. You can see some impacts already on the model. So what we have here is in this area here, there's going to be, well, the intention was for an expansion of a factory, but also yeah, there were questions from interested parties for risk mitigation, in this case especially floods. So we have the company or the owner or the investor, as Alex mentioned, operations, logistics. So we can see here on the elevation model, you know, a big road. But then there's also interest from insurance companies, first responders like firefighters, authorities. Yeah, so we have this elevation model, and then we've overlaid that with the intended buildings. And what we can see here, if I flick backwards and forwards, we can see here that we had a lower part here, and the new buildings are impacting on the elevation. So because the buildings were built in a at an elevation, so we don't have the impact of the floods. And we've lost a retention volume of 3,500 cubic meters. Now, for all of this, there's regulatory requirements in Germany. If you lose retention volumes from a stream, you got to assess the impacts of this loss of retention volume, because you need to consider the properties further downstream. So yeah, the stream needs the same room as before. So floods are not building as they move further downstream. So that was one of the main regulatory requirements here when setting the elevation of the building. And we can see here the loss of retention volume, but also the impact of the flood if we would if we would leave the levels as they are. And we can see here the impacts on the on the side in the west, and that actually has happened. So there was great interest if we build something new, not to make make the same mistakes again, or mitigate it. So we can see here, if I flick backwards and forwards, there was the inundation of the flood, but then we've raised this ground here, so we don't have the impacts. And also, if you're taking, climate change or rain events, flash flooding into consideration, that was also considered during the planning process. And the pipes were chosen in a size that they could take the 1 in 100-year rain events, but looked into the future with increased impact of the rain. Now, from that, we also looked at the change of flow pattern. As you can see here, these arrows are going very, very straight. If you bring the buildings in, the whole flow pattern of a major flood would change, and especially in this area here, there's a lot of storage space, and we had, before mitigation, we had a inundation of between 30 and 70 centimeters, and later on we brought it, or the planning actually brought it to 2 to 6 centimeters, and since then there hasn't been even the rain events didn't have any impacts on the operations, which is the greatest feedback we can get. And also with the change of these levels here and the change of the flow pattern, inundations in the old or existing areas changed as well. So there would also be the mitigation or management operations looking into the futures to mitigate this. So the scenarios view into the future to prepare for mitigations. Now, the retention volume loss has been done through planning on site. So this was a flat area, and from the flat area, we actually excavated the material to build the ditch. And as you can see here, we have 3,400 cubic meters of lost retention volume, and in here there is the 3,700 cubic meters. So there's another extra almost 10% allowing for increased flooding and changes in climate change. And how does it look? The area picture. So you can see the extent here. There's the ditch. This is actually the engineering planning and measurements afterwards for calculations. And this calculation actually, or the result was fed back to the authorities to prove actually that we've taken the regular requirements mentioned earlier into consideration and offset it on site to reduce the impacts or to mitigate impacts further downstream. And that was one of the main parts to get a tick from the authorities as well. And this is done, hands-on mitigation through planning. And I'm now going to hand over to Uwe, who we look into the modeling side and more detail on the municipalities. Uwe?
Okay, thank you, Peter. So I'll take over, and I'm going to share my screen. So hope it's visible. And so my name is Uwe Range. I'm from the office HPC in Kassel, right in the center of Germany. And I'm also going to switch off my camera now, just to give more space to the images. And I'm working in GIS data modeling and data acquisition. And I would like to present some projects working for cities and municipalities, because the administration also have to consider more and more the effects of flooding, flood risk, and heavy rain risks. And as we have tragically experienced in the Ahrtal in Germany some years ago, so it's the administration are very aware that we have to look at these problems and figure out like how to manage the risks. And since floods cannot be prevented, and we'll see more flooding through climate change, and so the task is going to be to identify the endangered areas and buildings and to figure out prevention measures. Okay, so I would like to present first some project for an entire municipality and how it can be modeled, the risks for preventing heavy rain and flooding to endanger people and buildings. And later on, I would like to look how modeling can be used for more detail, how to find out like real change in construction to prevent the flooding in specific places. So here we see some community, some municipality in the center of Germany with in a rural area, and you can see there are not so many, there are many little towns and one river going through. And as you can imagine, since the river is flowing down here, the most danger for flooding will be in the lower part. And there has been flooding, so the administration contracted us to do some model to find out where the most endangered areas are. So the modeling is done in several steps. First step is to use the 1 meter grid data, which is publicly available, and do some first modeling run with the flow path and sink areas. They are identified here already. And on the other side, the administration is providing us with the buildings and areas that are like important and where they are located. If we look at this in more detail, we can see in the preliminary model that we can see areas where the water is going to be flooded. And also we can implement the sewer line system in the modeling runs. And the next task is going to be to refine the model, because we can see there are still some flaws here, like some flow paths that stop running. And so we have to do some field works and also use some more detailed data. So we use, for example, laser scan or LiDAR data to get a better model of the river path. And also we go out in the field, we do some field investigation, take photos of the structures in the water lines. And we also do some 3D survey in order to find the size of the rivers and the size where the water can pass through. Next step is to do also some citizen survey. So we ask the citizens where there was some flooding in the past. And if you put everything in one place, in one geographic information system, it's very well visible, and you can compare the events, the past events, with the data that the model will deliver. Another source is, for example, incident reports of the fire department. The fire departments have a central database, so it's very helpful and easy to query the database and get the relevant flooding incidents. When the model is fixed in a detailed way and computed, we can put some rain on top of the model, and there are different ways of putting the rain. There are databases of past rain events, and they show, like, for example, here you can see the borders of the municipality, and you can see that the where the rain went, and also like the amount of the rain or the rain event, and you can apply this to the model. This will give you some realistic picture to compare it with the actual events, and it will show, like, with this event what happened on the ground. But on the other hand, we have to look into the future, and we have to expect in the future some more and more heavy rain events. So it might be also better suited to use some uniform rain event for the entire area of investigation, and which might be even bigger than what we've seen in the past. So with computing the hydrodynamic model, we get the flow paths and the sink areas. We get as well the flow speed and runoff speed, which also shows us, like, where the dangerous areas are. And as a result, in some GIS modeling, we identify the places and the buildings which are in danger of being flooded or being in a flow path of some, like, high-speed water, which is very dangerous too. So as a result of the modeling, what we can get is some recommendations for improvement in design, in the water runoff design, in the sewer line design, and other things that are relevant, like basins to collect the water, or like to change river flows and build retention areas. So this is some recommendations we can give to the administration. We can also provide maps with classified building areas, which can be used by the administration to locate these places and see what the next step might be, and also to publish the maps and show the citizens where they for themselves may do some change on their private properties. And for the buildings that were identified, like the important public buildings, like, for example, here some nursing homes, some hospitals, also fire department buildings or police buildings, there will be some risk data sheet which incorporates the most important data, the map with the risks, the hydrological data, like how high the water might rise, and some questionnaires, or like some evaluation of detailed questions, like where are there rooms in the basement, for example, for nursing homes. So like really detailed questions which might help the owner of the building to do some prevention for some flooding or heavy rain event. So this is something that is done for the entire city or community, and will help them like with a complete data set for managing the risks in the future. Another step or another part, yeah. Yes. So you see here some rain event. You heard some voice. I think that was a video that my neighbor sent me. There was some actually rain event in my hometown, which gave us the opportunity to check on our models, because on this rain event that was 40 millimeters in 20 minutes, and we could check with the photos that were taken on this day and the data of the fire department, like if the models that we can use are realistic and if they show what really happened. So you can see here the little town that the rain event happened. And you can see, like in the lower part, there is the model shows different areas that might be flooded. But actually, the more critical areas were the ones like further up, where the water came through. And here we also saw like floodings. If I go into a little bit more detailed map here, we saw some flooding in different intersections. And like because also inlets couldn't take the water anymore. And if I go a little bit more in this detail, we try to look into the model if we could see why the flooding occurred. And we can see here some basins, some rain retention basin, and this couldn't keep the rain back. And the administration asked, of course, like why this wasn't sufficient to keep the rain. And the first step we had to do is to look if the model is right. You can see here some flowing paths going here, but with photos from the event, we could see very quickly that the water didn't run like this way. It was running in some other ways. And the reasons are, for example, garden walls, curbstones, and other things, which means it is important to do some detail, to put some more detail into the model, which we did here. We put the walls and the curbstones, and you can see here. And then we saw that the flowing paths were more fitting to what we saw in the actual event. And then we were looking at this rain basin, retention basin, and we could figure out with the area or with the data we could get from our model that the basin was set up to get the water from some new built area, which is around here. And with a rain smaller than 20 millimeters put into the model, you can see that everything seems to work well and the basin is not overflowing. So probably the design was made for 20 millimeters of rain. But in the future, we will have probably to expect more rain. And actually on this day, we had 40 millimeters of rain. So if we put this in the model now, we can see one of the problems is that the basin is not big enough to get the rain, to keep the rain. And also that we have the problem here that there's some overflow and the water adds to this water. So like we have a much bigger retention area, catching area for the basin, which shows that it will not be able to hold back all the water. And if we would look into some even bigger rain event, we have some little river here, which is here has some inlet to be in a channel. And this inlet we saw from the photos of this rain event would still work at 40 millimeters of rain, but probably not at 50 or 60. So then we would even have some higher catchment area for this part. And then, of course, the flooding will occur here and in all places further down. So this was very useful to show the administration where the critical areas are. And if you look at in a larger scale, we have the small area, catchment area where it works. But then if the rain is stronger, the catchment area gets much larger. And for even more heavy rain, the catchment area is like 10 times as big as the retention basin was made for. So that's a good way to use models to identify the places that should be looked at and redesigned. So while the model is flowing here, we can I would like to summarize that 3D models and rain models and flooding models can help a lot the authorities and public communities to figure out where the places are that needs to be looked at, maybe that needs to be redesigned. Also the places like inlets that needs to be maintained constantly. Where are the important ones? What rivers needs to be looked at? Like you can see the little river here that stops here and goes into the channel. You see our basin here, our rain retention basin. And the model shows pretty good where the dangers are, and the actual flooding was, for example, here, and the basements were flooded. So I think that gives us a good help for identifying these areas. Okay, so thank you, and any questions I would be happy to answer later on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Oh, it's incredible to see how tangible, let's say, these effects and the monitoring is on a 3D model. So I see some comments, questions coming in. So that's great to know, great to see. And now for the last intervention of the session, and I'll leave the word to John.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, John, we see you. Thank you.
I think my camera's switched. Kia ora, everybody, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud. So my name's John Ricks. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Just a huge thanks to everybody for accommodating my time zone. It's currently 20 minutes past 8 in the evening here. My stomach is starting to rumble. I should have had dinner earlier. My plan is to give you a brief introduction and then crack into a presentation structured around 3 main areas. I'm going to provide some New Zealand context, including where I took the photograph that sits in the background of this starting image. The introduction will provide some climate disclosures and some of the New Zealand flood risk setting. I'll talk through a conceptual risk framework for evaluating and managing flood risk and the application of that framework with an example. Also finish with some key messages. So, as I said, I'm calling from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Specifically, I'm calling from Auckland. We're located east of Sydney, Melbourne, similar latitudes, but about a 4-hour flight east. Auckland is our country's largest city. That's located about 2/3 of the way up the North Island, which is referred to as Te Ika a Maui, which means the fish of Maui. So New Zealand has a population of about 5 million people, and about 1.7 million people live in Auckland, which is our most populous city. We have high population growth rates for a developed economy, currently 1.5% to 2% growth a year, and that equates to about 1 million people every 20 to 25 years, off the back of 5 million people living here currently. So that's about 50,000 people a year, and net migration exceeds those natural increases since about 2010, with a little blip whilst our borders were closed due to COVID. There's currently a strong rebound. So I moved here for a 2-year trip in 2006. I'm still here 17 years later, and I've been working in the flood hazard, flood risk and flood adaptation space, having built my career off the back of coastal and hydraulic modelling skills. And I've spent all but one of my years working in New Zealand for Tonkin and Taylor. And Tonkin and Taylor's possibly a name that you're unfamiliar with unless you've done some work in the Pacific region. So just very quickly, we are an employee-owned business. We've been operating from New Zealand for nearly 65 years, and we've now got a growing presence in Australia too. We work across all the Pacific region, and we do a small amount further afield as well. So TNT, Tonkin and Taylor, has grown dramatically during my time in New Zealand, about 350 when I joined, about 1,300 now. And as I say, growing presence in Australia. We experienced a lot of growth after the Canterbury earthquake sequence in the early 2010s. And that earthquake sequence and all the other hazards sort of gives you a little bit of an example to the backdrop that we have in New Zealand. And Tonkin and Taylor has a fortunate and long and enviable history working on some of New Zealand's most complex natural hazard and physical risk problems. Finding areas in New Zealand without the physical hazard is harder to find than those areas with a hazard. So I'm fortunate enough to work with a great team across many different disciplines, whether that be planners, geotech engineers, civil engineers, ecologists, scientists, GIS, digital experts, and collectively we have a vision, which is together we create and sustain a better world, which is why it's great to be talking to you all about what we can do together. I wanted to talk briefly about the North Island severe weather events. I think it did make the international news, but this was a significant period of 2 to 3 months in the earlier part of this year. And like many other areas around the world who have experienced significant flood events, we're seeing that trend increasing. Not necessarily as devastating as what we've seen happen in Libya or in terms of the numbers killed elsewhere, but unfortunately we did see 15 people die as a result of the North Island severe weather events in the first 3 months of this year. We've seen a huge disruption to people's lives and businesses, and many of that's still continuing, and people are still displaced from their homes. That image I'm showing on the left there is an image of Aotearoa's North Island. I was going to show just a couple of photos relating to the 3 areas that were probably most hit by the North Island severe weather events. That North Island severe weather event term that I'm using is a term that's being used by the central government and as part of the response and recovery package. So the first area that got hit very hard was the Hawke's Bay. Lots of flooding across the region. Stop bank, some countries might call that levees, were overtopped in numerous areas, and we saw some failures as well. Lots of properties located in hazardous areas within floodplains. There's some devastating scenes. This image on the right that you can see out of those 2 there, that's taken from the Esk Valley, internationally famous for its wine that some people might relate to. That was one of the hardest hit areas. The picture on the left, you might not be able to make it out, but that's a photo of a house in an apple orchard with an apple cart for collecting the apples that's sitting on the roof of the house. There's actually a debris line that's very near to the top of the roof line too. The other area that was hit very hard was Gisborne. Estimated 50,000 landslides across that region as a result of these series of events. 13,000 alone just in one of the catchments that drains into urban Gisborne town centre. Approximately 2,000 properties affected by a combination of flooding, landslides and river erosion. Now, not so dramatic in terms of photographs. And what you'll have to take my word for this, but these areas here, they show pretty much the full extent of the Auckland region, with a small amount dropped off the bottom. But these black areas in these images, they show the areas where rainfall was greater than 100-year ARI, 1% annual exceedance probability rainfall. The highest estimates were over 1,000 years from the event at the end of January. Interestingly, this picture on the left was at the end of January. This was another event within 2 weeks. And when you put the 2 together, this image here on the right shows the extent of Auckland that got impacted by rainfall in excess of 100 years. So over 1 million people live within that area, and all the 1.7 million people that live in the Auckland region experienced an extreme rainfall event. So by the end of February, the Auckland region had experienced half the usual rainfall for the year, and current indications are that we know that 55,000 buildings are located in floodplains, and the high-level estimate is about 10,000 floors are likely to flood above the floor level in those events in Auckland. This is an image from the Insurance Council for New Zealand, which shows insured damages between 1968 to 2022, just weather events only. It doesn't include the earthquake event, the earthquake series. But putting aside that first high value, we've seen an increasing trend since about 2000. But all of that pales into insignificance with what we've seen happen this year. $4 billion of estimated insured damage in 2023, and that estimate was made halfway through the year. The number will have increased since then. I want to just provide a little bit of a comparison. There's an internationally famous PIT review that was carried out in the UK following the 2007 floods, where 55,000 properties were flooded and 7,000 people had to be rescued and 13 people died, and nearly 500,000 people were left without water or electricity. The insurance bill at that time was expected to be about 3 billion. Somebody here might know what it actually turned out to be, but there's aspects of those statistics which are similar to what's happened in New Zealand, yet our population is about 10% of that in the UK. So we're yet to see whether the changes which came back from the PIT review in relation to flood risk management and resilience and vulnerability and critical infrastructure and emergency response, whether we're going to get something similar. There is a huge amount of change with the way that New Zealand's managing its natural hazards, which makes it a very exciting time in our careers at the moment. There's been a lot of good work that's been carried out, and I'm hopeful that trajectory will continue. We've just got a new government, so we're waiting with bated breath as to see some of the specifics around their policy. So one of the things that New Zealand has been taking an international lead on, and that is in relation to climate disclosures. New Zealand was the first country in the world to require the financial sector to report on climate risks. That was in 2020. It became law in 2021. So it is now law that Climate-related disclosures are mandatory for some large financial market participants. The requirement applies to large public listed companies, insurers, banks, non-bank deposit takers and investment managers. And that's about 200 entities in New Zealand are required to produce those climate-related disclosures. So that's a list there of all those that are required to provide their climate-related disclosures. I won't go through it all in detail, but I think this slide pack will be available at the end. So the reporting is required against climate standards, which are issued by the New Zealand's External Reporting Board. And there are 3 recent documents released by the XRB, publicly available. And some of those are in relation to it may take time to develop the capability to produce high quality climate related disclosures, that some disclosure requirements by their nature require exemptions. There's one they're talking about the merits of how entities should consider climate related risks and opportunities and then make decisions based on those assessments. I think Alex was alluding to earlier the changes which are going on in the UK. I mean, we're 3 years into this and we're still seeing lots of changes. Probably worth stating at this point that climate disclosures is not my main area of expertise, but very happy to connect you with people who can answer any questions you may have. I know that there's been a lot of lessons that have been learned over those last 2 or 3 years. It's also been a rapidly growing business area in New Zealand for Tonkin and Taylor. I'm proud to say that we've been at the forefront of that. But despite the disclosures, I think it's important to think about what are they for? They're there to help ensure that the effects of climate change are routinely considered in business, investment lending and insurance underwriting decisions. They're there to help climate reporting entities better demonstrate responsibility and foresight in their consideration of climate issues. And it's there to lead more efficient allocation of capital. But importantly, all of that, whether the disclosures are mandatory or not, we're certainly seeing a significant increase in the number of organisations that are wanting to better understand their physical risks, including a lot of organisations that are the non-mandatory ones as well as the mandatory ones. So, and they are bringing greater visibility to important topics. They relate to the management of business risk, and I'd argue that those physical risks should be treated the same way as any other business risk. Plenty of good risk-related frameworks out there. I'm a big fan of ISO 31000, where risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. It's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So having clarity of your objective is key to understanding risk. I've called it why. ISO 31000 would call it your scope and your context and your criteria. Why does your business care about flooding? How could your business be impacted by flooding? ISO 31000 talks about scope, context and criteria. It talks about risk identification, risk analysis and evaluation. It talks about risk treatment. I've omitted from this framework here the importance of communication and monitoring, deliberately to keep this simple, but not meaning to downplay the importance of communication and monitoring. So within there's some fantastic principles. Okay. Those principles around ensuring that your effort is proportionate to your outcome, making best use of available information, continually improving over time. Essentially, don't let perfection get in the way of good enough. The data is never good enough, but the effort required to get to that endpoint can seem huge. Applying some of these principles early on in your projects is a great way to see, well, what is good enough. This is a conceptual application of that framework. We've got an axis here, time, and flood risk. Let's imagine an organization over time. I'll relate this to a real world example next. We've got a business A, let's say it's got some awareness of its flood risk based on that best available information. Let's say it's in relation to concerns over their supply chain. That might be their objective. However, there's some uncertainty and therefore it remains unclear to them in this start period over here whether that risk is tolerable to their organization. The initial effort therefore relates to reducing that uncertainty because the risk may not be acceptable to the business. That requires additional work, keeping in mind that level of effort's got to be proportionate to the confidence they need in the outcome. And once that uncertainty is reduced, they've found that their risk is unacceptable, and efforts are then focused on reducing the risk within their supply chain. Conceptually, this is what I'm talking about. And this will vary from business to business. This could be a separate business. And some businesses, they really might be completely unaware of their flood risk. They might have huge uncertainty, therefore, and yet when they find out about it and reduce their uncertainty, they might not need to do anything about it because they're happy to accept the risk anyway. But it's very dependent on what is tolerable to each business. So relating this to a real world example, I wanted to talk about a large New Zealand organisation that provides tenancy services to nearly 200,000 customers and their whānau, which is a New Zealand Maori word for extended family. And they own and maintain nearly 69,000 public houses. The name of their organisation is Kāinga Ora. Kāinga meaning home, not a house, it's a home, and Ora is about well-being. So Kāinga Ora is well-being through places and communities. Now they have a vision to build better, brighter homes, communities and lives. So in addition to their tenancy services though, they're also focused on delivering urban developments, including accelerating the availability of build-ready land. We talked about a growing population in New Zealand, and they're needing to build a mix of housing for public housing, affordable housing, homes for first home buyers, and market housing of different types, sizes, tenures. They've delivered 7,000 homes in the past 4.5 years, the vast majority being new build homes. Their assets are worth nearly $40 billion. And within the next 10 to 15 years, they plan to build another 40,000 public, affordable and market homes. In terms of why, how does flooding affect them? These are 4 objectives that we agreed with them. This is communicating on these issues using terminology that extends throughout their organisation all the way up to board level. Again, I won't go through it in too much detail. It relates to their customers. Others might call it tenants. They call them their customers. The organisation's ability to deliver on that build program. They've got asset renewal objectives in there as well. And then we've got the 4th one around needing to meet those voluntary and mandated targets as well. And that's because of the origins of some of their funding needs that climate disclosure. So the following is not an exhaustive list of all the things that Kāinga Ora are doing. And neither an exhaustive list of all the things that they could be doing, but it does help provide a real world example of where we've been helping them develop their future works program linked to the framework and risk principles. So the hazard assessments, Kāinga Ora need access to a lot of flood data to meet their national scale objectives. They're based across the country. There's an ever increasing array of places to get your flood hazard information from. Modelling continues to be that main source. And there's heaps of different approaches now, all with advantages and disadvantages and different costs and timeframes and quality considerations. Just encourage you that there'll be a level of uncertainty with all of them, and encourage you to consider that level of uncertainty that your organisation can tolerate both now and importantly in the future. Make sure you're getting some good advice on these matters. But increasingly, that predictive information from the models needs to be supplemented by observed and experienced information to increase the confidence and to communicate more widely on these issues. Photographs, videos, social media, anecdotal information. There's just a screenshot from a crowdsourced platform that we helped initiate, and it's now being looked after by a national agency, and we're proud to have been involved with that. There's over 7,000 flood photographs there now on an open source database, which anyone can add whatever value they would like to it. Specifically to Kāinga Ora, they need to be able to make use of that available flood hazard information. They needed a repository with a metadata standard so that they can access and analyse their data easily and make quick decisions. And where there's gaps in their data, which cannot be filled by available data, they needed a guideline to help ensure that new hydraulic modelling work was going to meet their needs. They also found it helps with their procurement processes because it acts as a reference document for them in terms of what they're looking for from their piece of work. Turning hazard information into flood risk information, where those consequences of the flooding are understood, is another key program for Kāinga Ora. And as already alluded to, understanding the organisation's risk tolerance is key. We're fortunate enough to help facilitate those discussions with their board and a senior advisory group through a series of workshops to explore their risk tolerance in relation to acquisitions and renewals, their customers, i.e. their objectives. Some robust conversations, some solidarity, consensus reached on some topics, further investigation needed for others, but it's really good to draw out the conversations. But two different parts of the risk assessment. One, they're talking about ensuring that their existing customers live well, and they need to know how their customers and assets are going to be exposed to flooding. Hence, they needed to know they need to develop a floor level survey program. But secondly, to support their ability to deliver on the government build program, they need to know which areas don't flood or have low flood risk associated with them. And the answers to these two questions, from a technical perspective, they're probably quite similar approaches, but they need to be framed up very differently. One needs to know about the flooding on the site. The other one needs to know about the areas which don't flood on the site. And it's really easy in any of our flood risk related work to focus on the hazard, but it needs to be framed up in terms of what those objectives are. And this is an example of that latter one. There's an image there from some GIS identifying areas suitable or areas outside of floodplains sitting in land parcels that can be presented in a lot of different ways. Looking at my watch, I'm aware I'm running out of time. So just before I touch on risk treatment, and I will do that very quickly because there's a whole other topic there. There's a box at the bottom there, which is called a Partnership Intelligence Program. This Partnership Intelligence Program was there because Kyangora didn't want to lead on all of the topics that we've been talking to unless they have to. So this PIP, as we call it, was to reach out and engage with other organisations and leverage each other's work, and then through the PIP they could identify, well, what did they need to do and where could they build off what somebody else was already doing. I will just talk about this very, very quickly, and I think maybe my contact details are there at the end, but the PARA framework is a really useful framework for separating out your conversations on risk treatment, risk reduction, adaptation, whatever we want to call it. The PARA framework gives us a way we can talk about protect-based options, avoid options, retreat-based options, accommodate options. When we're talking to organisations or communities about how we're going to help reduce risk, it's important that there's a long list started with, and it covers all of these. Particularly when dealing with communities, there's a worry that there's only a retreat option being considered, but there's plenty of protect and avoid, and retreat and accommodate options as well. Within our piece of work for Kyangora, we did help develop some adaptation guidance relating to acquisition of property and new development and redevelopment, etc., and all the different things that they're trying to do. In summary, physical risks should be treated the same as all other business risks, I believe. Clarity of objective is key to understanding your flood risk. What is your organisation flood risk tolerance related to each of your objectives? What level of flood risk uncertainty is reasonable now and in the future? Strongly recommend adopting some principles early on in the process to ensure the outcome is good enough. And if risk or uncertainty is unacceptable, what are your options to reduce uncertainty, and what are your options to reduce risk? And there is an open invite. If anyone's ever in Auckland, I'd love to talk to you more about this. Come in, we'll have a coffee. Even if you're not in Auckland, just connect on Teams. Let's talk anyway. Very interested to know how we can help each other, how we can partner with you too. So please reach out.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you to all of our speakers. I think after having heard our 3 interventions, our 4 speakers, we have seen how much water-related physical risks touch every single one of us. So no matter the country, no matter the region, water is so local, yet its effects are globally shared. So I think we are at a time where the more we share, the more we benchmark, the more we help each other to find solutions, to find mitigation strategies. This really is, I think, the key to get around and have more shared success stories.